Hey there, everyone. This is Gregg Schutze for ReadyForTheDraft.com, and this is the Ready for the Draft podcast, episode 32 of the 2020 podcast series, getting you ready for the NFL Draft, which is set to begin April 23rd. That's right, less than 2 weeks away, a fully virtual draft. That means it's going to feel just like your online fantasy football drafts. Really going to be interesting to see how the broadcast really plays out on ESPN, ABC, NFL Network, completely virtual. All of the front offices, the GMs, really from home. They'll be working from home. So a lot of Zoom and Skype conversations you have to figure will be taking place. But we do have a draft. And, with that, we also have a Ready for the Draft podcast. And I've been mentioning this over the course of the last few podcasts since we've been sheltering in place, since, COVID-19 has really taken place, social distancing. I wanted to continue to put these podcasts together, really to give everyone a release, an outlet, something that we can talk about, something that we can look forward to. We know that the NFL season, we don't know what it's going to look like in 2020, but that's really kind of the goal and what we're striving for. We know that there is going to be a draft next week, April 23rd through the 25th. Something to really talk about, really something that I can immerse myself in and not really have to think about COVID-19, sheltering in place, what that all means for myself, my family, my friends, really be able to just kind of immerse myself in all things draft. So I hope that this is kind of a release and kind of an outlet for you as well. So we'll go ahead and jump into things. What I've really been doing over the last few podcasts is really taking everyone on a journey, a roadshow, if you will, taking a look at all 32 teams by division and really what that free agent market, what that's done to the NFL draft, what it's done to the rosters, because inevitably, if there is going to be a big free agent signing or a big trade, then you know that there's going to be one team that's going to benefit from that trade and another team that may be giving up, whether it's a cap casualty, a money dump, whatever the case may be. You're going to have two different teams. One team gains a positional player, and that maybe filling a hole. You got another team that now has a hole that needs to be filled. So you look at the draft, you have to really figure out what this is going to look like as everything goes through. So we talked about the NFC West in the last podcast, and we're going to be talking about the AFC West, obviously, in this podcast. Go ahead and round out this field trip, if you will, taking a look at all of these teams by division. And what's really, when we look at this division, you're looking at the Chargers. Phillip Rivers has moved on to the Colts. And so do you go Justin Herbert? Do you go Jordan Love? Then you have the Vegas Raiders with 2 first-round picks. You figure they have to be on the market for a wide receiver. But that second pick, what do? There's some different options there. Then you have the Broncos sitting there at number 15. Do they go corner? Do they go receiver? Is there going to be a receiver worth taking at number 15? And then the Super Bowl champs, Kansas City Chiefs, sitting there at number 32 overall. They can go in a number of different directions as well that we're going to go ahead and take a look at. But before we jump into things, it's really funny with the sheltering in place. It ultimately has me focusing on my draft so much that over the course of the last few days, I don't know how many changes I've made to my first round. And honestly, when I take a look at this draft, I think the first concern that I have is really that number 4 overall pick. What's going to happen with the New York Football Giants, as Chris Berman likes to call them? A lot of people are picking them to take a tackle, and it makes perfect sense. Mike Remmers has moved on to the Chiefs. You need to protect your investment in Daniel Jones, and obviously your running back, Saquon Barkley, who was drafted just a year prior. You've got Jedrick Wills, who's probably the best offensive tackle in this year's draft, and he's kind of a plug-and-play type offensive tackle. You can plug him in at right tackle, played the right tackle position at Alabama, the best pass sets in this year's draft, in my opinion. But you don't really get the type of star power defensively in this draft if you don't take Isaiah Simmons with that 4th overall pick. Now look, Isaiah Simmons, I've seen a lot of people that are talking about Isaiah Simmons' game in a negative way. They don't understand and don't, why there's so much hype around Isaiah Simmons. They say, you know what, he can't cover slot receivers, he can't cover tight ends, he can't play free safety over the top, he can't play in the box. I've seen all kinds of different things that really people are looking at Isaiah Simmons' game and they're saying, well, he just can't do any of this. Yeah, he might be fast for a linebacker. He's not he's not fast enough to be a safety. And I'm just left scratching my head going, what in the world are some of these people talking about? You look at Isaiah Simmons and what you have is a guy who can cover backs and tight ends at the linebacker position, something that the Giants just haven't had. You look at Alec Ogletree a season ago, he was not able to cover tight ends or the backs out of the backfield. Isaiah Simmons has proven to be able to do that. Lining up against receivers in the slot, facing South Carolina, and if you listen to my podcast, I've talked about this example time and time again, but it's just proof that Isaiah Simmons, he's a converted safety. He ended up hitting the weights, bulked up to 238 pounds, but he's a converted safety. He was kind of that Dorian O'Daniel. That's kind of how I compared him initially when he was there at Clemson. That linebacker that flew around all over the field. And there's so much more to his game, though, because he lines up against Shi Smith in this year's South Carolina game. Shi Smith is a slot receiver, solid slot receiver, one of the better SEC receivers out of the slot. And so, Simmons is beaten initially off the ball. And then he's able to recover with this 4.39 40 speed that he showed off at the combine. And he's able to time his jump, not only recover, but track the ball, put himself in a position to make a play, times his jump, and attacks the football in the air right at the catch point, knocks the football away. And that's just one example. But, I hear people say, well, he can't do it. There's one example right there, that he was able to, it was just a dynamic play that was proof that this guy has the athleticism to be able to do it. And you see him line up in the slot time and time again, and he's not getting beat. He's showing that he can make those plays. He can play over the top. He has the range to be able to do that. He can play in the box. He can rush the passer off the edge. He can time his blitzes up the middle, shoot the A-gap, and put pressure on the quarterback. This guy can make plays all over the field. If I'm Dave Gettleman, and I'm looking for a guy who can really make a difference, you've got star power on the offensive side of the ball. You've got Daniel Jones. You've got Saquon Barkley. I think you start thinking, well, I got to protect my investments. And, there's a hole at the right tackle position. Absolutely, you can plug in Jedrick Wills. But in round 2, you're not going to be able to find a guy like Isaiah Simmons. But if you take Isaiah Simmons in the first round, you're going to get a starting tackle in round number 2. Georgia's Isaiah Wilson, the mammoth right tackle, 6'7" and 340 pounds, the junior, he reminds me a lot of Phil Lodeholt from Minnesota, the Vikings, came out of OU, went to Minnesota and played, was a starter, was a mainstay there on the Vikings offensive line at right tackle for a decade. And I'm looking at Isaiah Wilson, and I think he could be the exact same type of player. So if Gettleman is smart, with it, in my opinion, I think what he does is he goes Simmons there, knowing that he can get a tackle in round 2. You just can't get a player with the versatility and the tool belt that Isaiah Simmons has. So the next pick that I'm really, kind of tossing around, what do I do with it, is the Jets. And if you listen to the podcast a few podcasts ago, I talked about the Jets taking a corner, taking C.J. Henderson. Why? Well, you lose Tremaine Johnson and you lose Darryl Roberts. Your starting corners from a season ago. Yes, you bring in Pierre Desir, who really had a breakout season, the last couple of years really in Indianapolis, but you still need a lockdown corner on the outside. C.J. Henderson was going to be that guy. But when I look at things, the other two needs on this team are offensive tackle and wide receiver. And at the offensive tackle position, I think you look at a lot of what Joe Douglas, who is the GM and he's an offensive line guy, what he's been able to do with that offensive line already, bringing in the likes of Connor McGovern to man that center position, and he's also addressed the tackle position as well, bringing in George Fant, and he's re-signed Alex Lewis. You've got Brian Winters to play the guard position. You still have Chuma Edoga, who started 8 games at right tackle a season ago. So do they need to go tackle with this pick? If Andrew Thomas is there or Tristan Wirfs, there's absolutely a possibility. And in my mock draft, both of them are available at number 11. But, and what's funny is really if you look at my first mock draft, which is usually more accurate than my final mock draft, I just go with my gut at the beginning. And I had Andrew Thomas going to the Jets at number 11. And if you're curious, I do have my very first mock draft. I have the results of the first mock draft on my website, readyforthedraft.com. You'll be able to see exactly who I had each team taking in round number 1 back in January. But I look at the Jets. They need a number 1 wide receiver. Yes, they brought in Brashad Perriman, and I was trying to talk it up, trying to talk myself into saying, you know what, they don't need the wide receiver. They've got Brashad Perriman. They can end up getting a number 1 wideout later on in the draft. But you know what? At the end of the day, let's not overthink things. Sam Darnold needs a number 1 wide receiver. CeeDee Lamb is a number 1 wideout. You're able to get CeeDee Lamb in round number 1. You look at an offensive tackle in round 2. I think Ezra Cleveland, yes, I had him initially going to Seattle in the first round, but I think Seattle has a bigger issue with getting a pass rusher, especially considering it doesn't look like Jadeveon Clowney may re-sign. So I think Ezra Cleveland falls to round 2. Jets are able to pick him up there. And then looking at a corner in round 3, Bryce Hall, 21 pass breakups as a junior. As a senior, his season's cut short with his leg injury, done for the year, not able to perform at the combine. A guy who I think his draft stock has fallen as a result, but he's a guy who can end up being a lockdown corner. So essentially what you've done is you've addressed all 3 of your needs with 3 players who can be starters week 1. So, I look at that and I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm looking at Vegas. I think Jerry Jeudy makes a ton of sense. We'll get into that second pick. But that trio there with the Jets, the Raiders, and the 49ers, I think they're all looking for a receiver. San Francisco, if Judy's not there, I think they go Henry Ruggs. I really think they do. At the end of the day, I talked myself into it. I was like, Henry Ruggs III, you put him there, CJ Henderson at the cornerback position, you can get a corner at 31 overall. I have him taken, the Niners taking Jeff Gladney. But you look at Henry Ruggs III, Pro Football Focus really pointed out that this was a guy who ran a lot of ins, a lot of slants, a lot of crossing routes, and that's what Kyle Shanahan's offense likes to do. And this guy is so explosive, a touchdown every 4.08 receptions. So, this is a guy who is dynamic, only 88 receptions in his career, with Alabama. And despite that number, I mean, this was a guy who found the end zone, 24 times. I mean, it's just absolutely staggering, what this guy was able to do with his explosiveness. Ran a 4.27 40. And I look at the impact that Marquise Brown had for the Ravens when he first stepped onto the field. I think you're going to see something similar with Henry Ruggs III, which then means Denver needs to address their wide receiver position. They also need to address the cornerback position. They lost Chris Harris. They bring in AJ Boye, but they still need to address the other side because Bryce Callahan is a nickel. Isaac Yiadom is not ready for a starting position. So we'll get into that. CJ Henderson really makes the most sense there for Denver. So been making some adjustments to the draft. What makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Michael Pittman Jr., maybe it was a little bit of a stretch to put him in round number 1, but I think he's a solid round 2 pickup. I'm looking at Indy, putting him back there. I had him at going to Indy earlier. I think he would complement T.Y. Hilton very well. Phillip Rivers, I think, would fall in love with throwing the football to Michael Pittman Jr. as well. So that's kind of what I've been doing over the last few days, has really been looking at my draft, trying to really work things together. And before I had my last podcast where we're really taking a look at each of the divisions, I wanted to make sure that I got things right with each of these teams. So let's go ahead and jump into the Chargers. And you know what? The Chargers sitting there at number 6. What's crazy is you won't see Phillip Rivers in the Bolts uniform. He's been a fixture under center for them. 224 games started, 235 if you count the playoffs. That's in a row since September 11th, 2006. So what direction do they go? This is a franchise that's only known two starting quarterbacks, Phillip Rivers and Drew Brees, since 2001. So, Tyrod Taylor's not going to be the answer, obviously. So, what direction do you go? Do you go Justin Herbert or do you go Jordan Love? I'm not ready to jump on the Jordan Love bandwagon. And in our next podcast, we're going to start breaking down all of the quarterbacks, and running backs. We're going to go position by position, taking a look at really where I see the different players coming off the board. Who do I see coming off the board in rounds 1, 2, and 3, and then also what do we see for the day 3 picks 4 through 7 as well. And that's really where the debate's going to be with Justin Herbert and Jordan Love. I think both Herbert and Love do go off the board in round number 1. If you look at my mock draft, I have Jordan Love going to the Colts in round 2. I think the Colts end up trading back into round 1 to get their quarterback. But we'll talk about that in the next podcast. So when you look at the Chargers and you look at Justin Herbert, this is a guy, he's a big, physical, strong arm quarterback with a lot of athleticism. Reminds you a lot of Phillip Rivers in that sense. 6'6", 227 pounds. This is a guy who came to Oregon and was a star from the onset. There as a freshman, really stepped onto the field and was a difference maker for the Ducks. He steps on, as I said, and in his second start, ties the school record for 6 touchdown passes. The following week, he accounted for a school record 512 total yards, also tying Bill Musgrave's record for passing yards in 1989, which was set in 1989 with 489. 12 touchdowns in 3 games equaled the mark set by Joey Harrington in 2000. Marcus Mariota in 2012. Both of those guys were taken in the top 3 in their respective drafts. Now Herbert, he did battle injuries in his first 2 seasons. So, 2018 was really his first full season as a starter. And he did eclipse 1,000-yard passing mark, threw for 29 touchdowns, just 8 interceptions, but he completed just 59.4% of his passes. Ducks finished 9-4 record in their first season under Mario Cristobal. And Herbert had a chance to enter the draft a season ago. I thought it was actually a good move coming back as a senior. He completed just under 67% of his passes, throwing for over 3,400 yards, 32 touchdowns, just 6 interceptions. Some may just criticize the fact that he just threw for 300 yards just 4 times in 2019. But it should also be known that Cristobal, is a former offensive lineman from the U and really changed the culture with the Ducks by infusing a different level of toughness led by that power running game and that physical offensive line led by Penei Sewell, who will be a top 5 pick in next year's draft. Really was leaned on to lead a team, in a balanced offense, and ultimately the Ducks led the Ducks to a Rose Bowl victory over Wisconsin as a senior. And there's no question, like I said, the prototypical size, the arm strength to make every throw in the NFL route tree. You can make those downfield throws on those 9 routes, those streaks to beat the deep safety. Shows he can throw to the wide side of the field from the near hash on a line, has the velocity to fit the pass into the tight window, getting the ball to the target in a hurry, does a great job at the line of scrimmage, identifying the matchup that he wants to attack. You see him going through his progressions, sees the entire field, makes confident decisions regarding where to go with the football, and the athleticism in the pocket, able to manipulate the pocket, stepping up to avoid the rush, rolling away from pressure to make a throw down the field, drops his arm angle to fit the pass in, does a good job scoring his shoulders to the target while on the move as well. Eye discipline, is something that you definitely see as well. Holding the safeties in the middle of the field before letting go of the pass to the outside. His ball fakes on play action are some of the best in college football. This kid has a high football IQ. He won the Campbell Trophy, which is the equivalent of the academic Heisman. Had a 4.01 GPA in college. I didn't realize you can get over a 4.0 in college, but apparently you can because Justin Herbert did it. And so, then there's the athleticism. For a guy this size, he reminds me a lot of Josh Allen from a season ago with being able to move as well as he does for his size. He's not afraid to pull the ball and run. His long strides allow him to eat up a ton of yards in a hurry. And I mean, there's really no surprise that he ran a 4.68 40 at the combine. Considering that performance on the ground against Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl resulted in 3 rushing touchdowns, and that was really key to the Ducks ultimately getting that win. So he does get beat up about his ball placement, but it still doesn't mean that he doesn't have the ability to put that intermediate pass on the mark. It's just there's inconsistency. If you watch that Rose Bowl game, showed off being able to put a 16-yard back shoulder throw on Juwan Johnson away from the corner to the outside on one play. Then the very next hits a tight end on a wheel route, placing the ball over his outside shoulder, just drops it right on in. But the problem is that he seems to wait an extra count before releasing the ball, not really trusting what he sees, overanalyzing things, paralysis by overanalysis at sometimes, just needs to let it fly. Has a tendency to put in breaking routes on the hip of the wide receiver as opposed to throwing the receiver open by putting it out in front. That allows the defenders to get a hand on the ball and make a play. His deeper throws don't always have enough air under them, which just causes the passes to sail. Also needs to put some air under his fade routes to allow his receivers to just go up and make a play on the football over the corner and in front of the safety. Those are some of the issues that you really see with Herbert, and it's just something that the pros and the physicality and what you have there with Justin Herbert, I think it outweighs the concerns. And you're bringing in a proven leader, a guy who does whatever it takes on the field to win. And a lot of people talked about his inability to lead a football team, but what you saw at the combine and at the Senior Bowl, everybody was talking about it on social media about how guys were gravitating towards him. So even though he's not the most outspoken and gregarious leader that you might see from a Baker Mayfield, I think this is a guy, the introvert. Look, Marcus Mariota was not a guy who came out of Oregon as a rah type of leader, but he was a guy who also commanded respect. And I look at Justin Herbert, from that perspective. This is a guy who's going to come in. He's very intelligent. I think he'll pick up the playbook very quickly and he'll be able to play on a team that has some tools. He's got Austin Eckler there at running back. He's got a couple of receivers with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. But look, I think what's going to end up happening is after the Chargers get their quarterback in round number 1, they're going to look for some additional weapons. So in round number 2, I think they're looking at Jonathan Taylor out of Wisconsin. Get that running back in there. Yes, they picked up Austin Eckler, but Melvin Gordon is gone. So you lose Melvin Gordon, and Austin Eckler, I just don't think is going to be a guy that can be that 3-down back and just be your workhorse. And Jonathan Taylor, look, he had 968 touches in just 3 years in Madison with the Badgers. And so that's a huge concern. Yes, he did have 926 carries, over 6,100 yards, and 50 touchdowns in his career. But you have to worry about some of the wear on those legs. And if he has a guy that he can share the backfield with a little bit, I think that's going to help with his longevity. So the Chargers going from one Badger to another. And with Jonathan Taylor burst onto the scene as a freshman in 2017, this was a guy that people weren't really talking about initially. Ran that 10-4 100 meters in high school that everyone was talking about. Just showed off some explosive speed. Rushed for nearly 2,000 yards as a freshman. Fell just 23 yards shy of eclipsing the 2,000-yard mark. Could have been the first running back ever to have 3 straight seasons of 2,000 yards. As it stands, in 2018 and 2019, back-to-back 2,000-yard seasons, first running back to do that since Troy Davis out of Iowa State back in the 90s. But he's just a powerful runner, and has that exceptional vision to see the holes open up, see the cutback lanes. But really, it's one of the things that is a trademark of a Wisconsin running back is the patience, allowing the big offensive lineman to get in front of him. And once that happens, he looks for those cutback lanes. And once he sees them, he puts his foot in the ground. There's no wasted movement, and he gets north and south. His ability to plant and make cuts up the field without losing any speed, that's one of the things that's going to make him lethal at the next level. And so he has that breakaway speed. He has that acceleration to get up to top end speed quickly, ran that that 4.3940 at the combine. I think that really turned a lot of heads for a guy as big as he is, 5'10", 226 pounds, still ran that 4.3940, 36-inch vertical leap, 3-cone drill, 7.01 in that 3-cone drill. That's going to test, your lateral agility. And when you're talking about that, there were only 3 running backs that were faster than him in that drill. So when you're talking about the lower body explosiveness, his ability to move laterally, he absolutely has that. And so that's something that I see with him is he's going to be able to juke you in the open field. He can run by you, and then he also has that lower body strength to run through you. He can run through arm tackles. You better, come prepared, come to work, pack a lunch, and make sure that you're tackling him, gang tackling, rally to the football as much as possible. Make sure that his shoulders are square to the sideline instead of getting north and south, because once he gets head of steam, he's a difficult guy to bring down. I look at the Chargers. Melvin Gordon's gone. Austin Eckler teaming with Jonathan Taylor. That makes a ton of sense to me, and I think that really addresses a key need there for the Chargers. Now you're looking at the offensive line in the 3rd round. And the reason why we're doing that is, Russell Okung, first and foremost, was traded to the Carolina Panthers for Trey Turner, who's going to take over at the guard position. Creates a hole there at left tackle. Now, Brian Bulaga was brought in to take over the right side. Sam Tevi just was a disaster over there. They needed the upgrade, so Brian Bulaga comes in. I don't think Brian Bulaga is going to play left tackle. I think he's really comfortable on that right side. So you do need a left tackle. And it's one of those things when you look at the Chargers, they already have Trey Pipkins on the roster. Could he develop into a starting tackle? That remains to be seen. But I'm looking at a guy who, it's someone who I think has the ability to be a starter at the next level. He just needs he's still raw, and that's Prince Tega Winogo out of Auburn. 6'5", 308, very athletic. You can absolutely see that. Very fluid movements laterally. Has some pretty good power as well to generate some movement in the running game. His big issue is, some of that technique. He needs to get in an NFL position with an NFL position coach and really work on some of these things because the hands don't always match the feet, gets overextended at times, wants to bend at the waist, lunging, leaning. He's going to lose balance. He's going to lose leverage, and he's going to get exposed. So he needs some time. He's not going to be a day one starter. If you can start Pipkins right now and then allow Winogo to develop, then you can potentially have a couple of decent tackles on your hands a few years down the road. As it stands, Bulaga, 31 years of age, signed a 3-year $30 million contract, so he signed through the 2022 season. I think with Winogo, because of the potential, because of the athleticism, I think round 3 is good value for him, and really would address some depth if nothing else, but they get another need area that's addressed. So then I think, to start off day 3, you look at the Chargers and you look at that receiver position, and outside of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, you have cause for concern. I think the cupboard's bare. I think this is a position where they're going to double up. Andre Patton, Jason Moore, Tyron Johnson, Jalen Guyton, Darius Jennings. Those are the other receivers on the roster. Could they go receiver sooner? They absolutely could. But I think you can sit in round number 4 because of the depth of this position and land a receiver who can really make an impact. And I'm looking at Quintez Cephas out of Wisconsin. So you're getting this Wisconsin duo of Taylor and Cephas. Let me tell you why Cephas is the guy that you want to look for. The issue with Cephas, at least at the combine, was he ran that 4.7 340, really got an awful start and struggled there. And I think that's really what hurt his draft stock. What's crazy though, is he has this 38.5-inch vertical leap. So there is lower body explosiveness to him, and a guy who just always seemed to get behind defenses, would get vertical. And, some of it was being able to beat the guys off the line, getting that good release, and he's exceptionally strong too, to really power through the jam, from some of those guys trying to redirect off the line. 23 reps at 225 in the bench press at the combine. That was, the most that you saw from a wide receiver at the combine. Very powerful. and a guy who I think can get vertical. He ended up improving his time. I want to say he was in the high 4.5s at his pro day. Because yes, there were a few colleges that were able to get the pro day scheduled early in the draft process. 59 receptions, 901 yards, and 7 touchdowns in 2019. Averaged 16.1 yards per reception in his career. Now, look, he's only a junior, but in 2018, he was charged with sexual assault. He was exonerated and ultimately was able to not only re-enroll at Wisconsin, but then he was also able to make it back out onto the football team. And look, he had Jack Cohn at quarterback, so the numbers probably could have been even higher. Additionally, he was really the only receiver that was making an impact on the outside. And, you had Wisconsin that had a stable of running backs, not just Jonathan Taylor running the football. So, his numbers, had he played at a pass happy, offense or a more balanced offense, I think you really could have seen some big numbers out of Quintez Cephas. And I think the Chargers getting him in round 4, really makes a ton of sense. This is a good kid. He was wrongfully accused of a crime that he did not commit. And again, he was found not guilty of these charges, which was ultimately why the school brought him back and welcomed him in. And, I really want to see him do well and see him succeed. And I think getting him on the Chargers, when you think about it, if you can have Justin Herbert at quarterback, Jonathan Taylor and Austin Eckler at running back, with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Quintez Cephas at receiver, and Hunter Henry at tight end, I think that's really a good nucleus of skill position players. So then you move on from Cephas, round number 5. I'm looking at the linebacker position, and a guy that's no longer on the Charger roster, one of my favorites, is Jatavis Brown. Now, Jatavis Brown, not the biggest guy at all. He's just 5'11", but a guy who just would fly around to the football, make plays all over the field. And I look at the outside linebacker position. There's no depth behind Melvin Ingram and Uchenna Nwosu. And then in the inside, you've got Nick Vigil and Denzel Perryman. Drew Tranquil is kind of that hybrid linebacker, that new age linebacker, could also play safety. That's really kind of roaming around there between the inside and outside. And I think there needs to be some additional depth. And I'm looking for another guy who can be an explosive playmaker that can really roam the field. And I'm looking at Davion Taylor out of Colorado. Davion Taylor, 6 foot, 228 pounds, ran a 4.49 40 at the combine, brings some athleticism and speed to that defense. I think, his versatility is something that the Chargers will welcome on the defensive side of the football. Moving on to round number 6, I mentioned that the Chargers would likely double up at the position, and I'm looking at a guy. He was the only FCS receiver to declare himself eligible for the draft early, and I'm looking at Isaiah Coulter out of Rhode Island, 6'3", 190 pounds. A guy who 72 receptions. Over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns in 2019. And, somebody, from an athletic standpoint, this is a guy who at the combine looked like a very fluid athlete, very effortless, going through the gauntlet, showed some natural hands, ran a 4.45 40. So I mentioned he was 6'3", he actually measured in a 6'2", 198 at the combine. 36-inch vertical leap as well. So he's got some athleticism to him. And I look at him, you bring him into that fold with that mix of skill position players, and I think you really start building something there for the Chargers, in this post Phillip Rivers era. And then when you look at the Chargers, you're talking about that number 7, that 7th round pick. I'm actually looking at a guy who can be a little bit of, can be versatile. You lost Derek Watt, the fullback. He's no longer there. He's in Pittsburgh now. Hunter Henry, the tight end, franchise tag, a guy who doesn't seem to really be able to stay healthy. Virgil Green, more of a blocking tight end more than anything else. I'm looking at a guy who could be a fullback. He could be an H-back. Can play the tight end position, can be split out or in the slot as well. I'm looking at Charlie Taumapeu out of Portland State. This is a guy who I think has that athleticism, like I said, to be a receiver, but he has the versatility to be able to block in a number of different schemes. And over 100 receptions in his career, 1,876 yards and 11 touchdowns. 16 yards per reception in his career as well. Not overly fast for the tight end position, but it's respectable. 4.75 40. But that 36.5 inch vertical leap really jumps out to you. And then additionally, we talk about that 3-cone drill and the ability to make those cuts. And ran a 7 flat 3-cone drill. Second fastest among the tight ends. I think Charlie Taumapeu could very well come off the board earlier than round number 7, but I think he'd be a nice fit for the Chargers. So that's really what I have to round out the Chargers draft. So moving on to Las Vegas, the Raiders. Moving to Las Vegas. It's really weird. We're not talking about the Oakland Raiders. We're not talking about the Los Angeles Raiders. We're talking about the Las Vegas Raiders. And what's really crazy is if you look at that stadium that's just off the strip, it looks like the black hole. So it's going to be a lot of fun for the fans of the silver and black. And look, John Gruden and Mike Mayock, they're still trying to turn the Raiders into a contender again. That seems to be a monumental task at this point. The Raiders have only been to the postseason once since they lost the Super Bowl 37 to the Gruden-led Buccaneers back in 2002. After winning just 4 games in 2018, the Raiders won 7 this past season, though they won only 1 of their last 6 games, which really knocked them out of playoff contention and ended up with that number 12 overall pick. Derek Carr, there are questions about whether or not he'd be the quarterback. He's in the 3rd year of a 5-year, $125 million contract. They brought in Marcus Mariota to be his backup, but it looks like Carr is going to be the quarterback, so we can stop any of the talk about potentially seeing Jordan Love ending up in a Raider uniform, unless there's some sort of a blockbuster draft day trade where Derek Carr ends up in another uniform. I just don't see it happening. I think what you need to do with that number 12 overall pick is you need to find a number 1 wideout. A spot that is yet to be filled since Amari Cooper was traded after 6 games in 2018. Now, I know that's just a year and a half or a little over a year and a half, but still, you need to have a backup plan there. You need to have another receiver that you can really bring in. And last year, of the top 5 leading receivers, only Hunter Renfrow and Tyrell Williams were wide receivers. As a leading receiver was Darren Waller, the tight end, 90 receptions, over 1,100 yards and 3 touchdowns, and a pair of running backs. Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington. That rounded out your top 5. With CeeDee Lamb off the board, questions really, are the Raiders going to go Jerry Jeudy or Henry Ruggs? Jeudy's the polished, sudden route runner, and Ruggs is that vertical threat with a dynamic speed. I think Mayock and Gruden ultimately favored Jeudy based on his versatility. And when you talk Jerry Jeudy, you're talking about a guy who burst onto the scene nationally as a sophomore as Tua Tagovailoa's big play threat, finishing with 68 catches, over 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns as the Biletnikoff Award winner. As a junior, he was more of the volume catcher for the Tide. Really allowed Ruggs and Devontae Smith to step up as the big playmakers. And when you watch Jeudy play, it's really a treat to watch. Very sudden off the line, allows him to separate quickly from defenders. But we can get rerouted from by those bigger physical corners. You'll see that as a theme here as we go along. Has that straight line speed though to run by press corners and will eat up the cushion of a corner playing it off coverage in a hurry. Acceleration is so explosive, allows him to quickly run away from defenders after the catch, but it's really that route running that makes him an elite prospect. Understands leverage, does a good job stemming defenders away from him before making his break, which really creates that separation that you're looking for in the process. The fluid hips allow him to transition effortlessly and without any wasted movement. Offers up really sharp, precise routes, precise cuts in his routes, and his speed through those cuts really puts a lot of pressure on the defensive back. You just can't allow Jeudy to get a free release. So defenders are going to be looking to be physical with him off the ball, really looking to try to reroute him. He also struggles at times with tracking the football. I don't think he always makes the necessary adjustments when the ball's in the air. He can have some issues with contested catches, the more physical, going back to those physical corners again. Then there were those easy drops in the open field that he needs to eliminate from his game. But that said, I think Jeudy is a wide receiver 1, and he can play both inside and out. But I think really his home is ultimately going to end up being in the slot, where he can stretch the field in a myriad of directions and really make things a lot of fun there for the Raiders. Now, I mentioned that the Raiders have 2 picks, and they do. We move on to number 19 overall. The Raiders got the pick from Chicago in the Khalil Mack trade, and I actually had this pick penciled in, and I thought it was going to be Antoine Winfield Jr., the safety out of Minnesota. I thought that his versatility was perfect for Mike Mayock. And then what did they do? They go ahead and they sign Demarius Randall. I had to completely change my draft. I thought that Jeff Heath wasn't going to be the answer there opposite Jonathan Abram. I thought that was a veteran, a guy who could play on special teams and be a core key backup. And so I was right, but they ended up signing Randall, which means that they have to look at the cornerback position. And here's why. They've already addressed the linebacker position. Tahir Whitehead was released and was a free agent casualty. Let's see, Vontaze Burfict was a free agent casualty. Free agents, Corey Littleton, Nick Kwiatkowski were signed to absorb that blow a little bit. You've got edge rushers, Max Crosby and Cleveland Ferrell, who need help. They did combine for 14.5 sacks a season ago, needed some help up front. They brought Carl Nassib in, who racked 12.5 sacks up, in the last 2 seasons in Tampa. And then you have Malik Collins, defensive tackle. He also registered 14.5 sacks in 4 seasons with the Cowboys. You add him to the mix. You've got a lot of guys who can put pressure on the quarterback, both on the outside and from within. And, I look at that. I think ultimately you've addressed the defensive line up front. You've addressed the linebacker position, but you have to really look at that secondary. I already mentioned the safety position. We're going to get to the corner. Raiders not only finished 29th in the league with just 9 interceptions, but also finished with the most 40-yard plays, 16, and their 68 plays of 20-plus yards, 33 pass touchdowns given up, and 8.3 yards per reception were all 4th highest in the league. And to make matters worse, the only DBs in the top 50 in passes defended on their roster were a free safety, Eric Harris, and rookie corner Trayvon Mullen with 11 apiece, good for a tie for 44th overall. The Raiders did bring in first-rounder Eli Apple. His length was coveted by both Gruden and Mayock. He was supposed to start opposite Mullen, but they couldn't agree on a contract, which ultimately meant the corner position was going to be that major target. I thought that Trevon Diggs from Alabama could potentially be this pick, but I have him coming off the board number 17 overall to Dallas. And so here's kind of the thing. I'm looking at A.J. Terrell out of Clemson, and I've said that A.J. Terrell, I didn't really think he was going to be a first-round pick, but Mayock, he kind of likes that Clemson pipeline. Last season he went with Cleveland Ferrell, Trayvon Mullen, and Hunter Renfrow, all of whom made an impact as rookies. I think he may go back to that well and hope that he can catch lightning in a bottle again. Now, yes, Terrell's last performance in a Clemson Tiger uniform left a lot to be desired against Jamar Chase and LSU, but one game can't define a 3-year career with more ups than downs. In fact, his performance in the 2 previous games played a pivotal role in the Tigers' success. Against Virginia in the ACC Championship, A.J. Terrell had only 2 tackles in the game, but he excelled playing with inside leverage, repeatedly turning to run with the receiver, pinning his man to the sideline, not allowing any separation, taking away any option for the quarterback, Bryce Perkins. And then in the Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State, showed the ability to jump routes on the perimeter, to be disruptive at the catch point. I think he's a physical press corner, likes to get his hands on the receiver early, jams the receiver, reroutes him off the ball, does a really good job in trail technique, following just off the wide receiver hip before driving on the ball, closing burst, using his length to get his hand in to make a play on the football as well. Breaks quickly on the ball in off coverage, but sometimes that aggressiveness will get him into trouble, be susceptible to some double moves. He'll come down and run support. Doesn't always take the proper angle to the football, though. Needs to refine his footwork. Too many false steps in his plays on the outside that make it difficult at times to stay in phase. Also has trouble with his balance at the top of the route. Will lose contact with the receiver as he's tracking the ball to the inside. But that said, he still has that skill set to get him on the field early. I think he has a chance to start and as a rookie, and I think it'd be pretty cool for him to start opposite Trayvon Mullen, a guy that he played alongside there for the Clemson Tigers for a couple of years. I think the Raiders, in round number 1, you get a receiver, you get a corner, which will then allow them to transition to some of the other positions on the defensive side of the football. You look at the defensive tackle position. I think that's an area that they could potentially address. I mentioned they did bring in Malik Collins. You have Maurice Hurst, who's had a pretty solid career starting out there for the Raiders. Jonathan Hankins is on the roster, PJ Hall as well. But when you're talking about Vegas at the defensive tackle position, not everybody is going to be on the roster come 2020. You actually have a couple of guys who are going to be free agents, and I don't know that they're going to be able to sign everybody at the position. In fact, Jonathan Hankins and Malik Collins, both going to be free agents. Collins just signed a 1-year, $6 million deal. Jonathan Hankins may end up leaving in free agency as well, which ultimately leaves PJ Hall, Maurice Hurst on the roster. I don't think they want to take that chance. I'm looking at Jordan Elliott out of Missouri, 6'4", 302, really known for the 3-sack performance as a sophomore, a guy who's very athletic, can be an interior pass rusher, plays pretty well against the run. I think he needs to worry about it, or work on his pad level. Can get blown back at times in the running game. But look, Missouri is known for developing their defensive linemen. This is really the next guy in line. I think that'd be a nice pick to start out in round number 3. Now, I mentioned that cornerback position, we were looking at things and we were talking about, okay, Trayvon Mullen and AJ Terrell. After that, you've got Nevin Lawson, Nick Nelson, Isaiah Johnson, Ken Crawley. I think they double up at the position and look for a corner. And round 3 might be a little too soon, but I'm looking at Michael Ojemudia out of Iowa. And you're going to say, well, this has to be too soon for Michael Ojemudia. He's not one of the corners that people are really talking about. But if you talk to a guy by the name of Jim Nagy out of, at the Senior Bowl, you'll see what I'm talking about. He brought up the fact that he was one of the few guys that was able to reroute and redirect Chase Claypool, the big 6'4", 238-pound, huge receiver, could potentially be a tight end, was really pushing him around, able to redirect. And, Ojemudia, look, he's 6'1", 200. He's no slouch. He's got some decent size to him. 17 pass breakups, 6 interceptions in his career as well. And then he shows up at the combine, and I mentioned, 6'1", 200 pounds, and ends up running a... let's see, I lost him. Ends up running a 4.45 40, which is in the top 10 among the corners at the combine, 36-inch vertical leap. And I mentioned that 3-cone drill, the ability to make those transitions. That was the second fastest, only to a 5'8 corner by the name of Miles Bryant out of Washington. But he had the second fastest among all the cornerbacks who participated in the drill. And, breaking 7 seconds, that means that he's got some of that shiftiness to him and can move laterally, but he also has that straight line speed as well. I think Ojemudia is an ascending prospect. To me, it just feels like a Mike Mayock special. And then their third pick in round number 3, and look, Vegas may or may not keep all 3 third-round picks, but if they do, I'm looking at the linebacker position. And I mentioned linebacker. They've already addressed it with Nick Kwiatkowski. They've got Corey Littleton. They did bring back Nicholas Morrow and Kyle Wilbur on the roster, but I think that's a position that's going to be up for grabs, that weak side linebacker. And I'm looking at a guy who can play, has the versatility to play both inside and out. And I mentioned that versatility. That's something that I think Mayock is really going to be targeting. And Marcus Bailey, 6 foot, 235 pounds, only played in 2 games in 2019, suffered a season-ending injury. But if you look at that 2018 team, that's when Jeff Brom and the Boilermakers, Tyler Trent, this was a Purdue team, took down Ohio State. And the leader on the defensive side of the football was absolutely Marcus Bailey. 115 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks in that season. And when you look at his totals, really over the course of just 3 seasons, 324 total tackles, 28 tackles for loss, 14.5 sacks, 6 interceptions, had 4 as a freshman. 6 pass breakups as well, a couple of forced fumbles. This guy fills up the stat sheet. He's an intelligent player, really was kind of the heart and soul of that defense. And when he went down, Purdue's defense really struggled to replace him. They really couldn't. And so when you have a guy that means that much to the defense, number 21 there for the Purdue Boilermakers really meant a lot. And I think those are the type of guys that Mike Mayock is looking to bring in. I think that makes a ton of sense there for the Raiders at the end of round number 3. If you're scoring at home, round number 3, Las Vegas, that's going to be pick number, pick number 91, the pick that they got from Seattle. They have 2 back-to-back picks, 80 and 81 with Elliott and Ojemudia, and then they go ahead and get Bailey at the end of round number 3. So the Raiders then, they only have 2 more picks, and then their day is done. So round number 4, I'm really looking at them targeting a running back. Now, when you look at the roster, you've got Josh Jacobs, you have Jalen Richard, DeAndre Washington is gone. I think Josh Jacobs needs a guy who can really come in and spell him. I think he's a guy who can be that bell cow for you, can really be the workhorse, but he's not really used to that. I think he's used to sharing the backfield. I'm looking at a guy with some explosiveness like Keyshawn Vaughn. And I think that makes a lot of sense. If you watch Keyshawn Vaughn play, very dynamic runner. Let's see, 5'10", 214 pounds, ran a 4.5 140 at the combine. And at Vandy, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons after transferred in from Illinois, sat at the 2017 season. Look, he had 6.4 yards per carry for the Commodores. Even though the 2019 season, Vandy didn't really have much of an offense to speak of. He still managed to rush over 1,000 yards, 21 touchdowns in those 2 seasons, and wasn't much of a pass catcher at Illinois. Had just 25 receptions in those 2 seasons. Followed it up with 41 receptions for Vandy. And I think he'd be a nice compliment to Josh Jacobs. Feels like a guy who would be a Mike Mayock type pick as well. So I'm looking at, that's one of the things I think, Mike Mayock, he wants to find those versatile playmakers, guys who, made plays at the collegiate level. And, I think Keyshawn Vaughn absolutely did that. And looking at round number 5, if you look at the offensive guard position for the Raiders, I think it's a little thin. Tackle, you've got Colton Miller and Trent Brown. You've got Brandon Parker, David Sharp. I think you're in good shape there. And then at the center position, you have Rodney Hudson. But then at the guards, you've got Richie Incognito and Gabe Jackson. And the thing with Richie Incognito is, how much longer is he going to be around? He is signed through 2021, signed a 2-year, $12.7 million deal. But look, Incognito's 36 years of age, so he's not going to be a long-term answer there. There's really no depth to speak of at that guard position. So I think this is where they're going to look for a guard to at least provide some depth and potentially take over for Incognito when he calls it a career. And I'm looking at a guy out of Louisiana Lafayette by the name of Kevin Dotson. If you haven't gotten to see him play, he didn't show up at the combine. He wasn't invited, but 6'4", 321 pounds, and the guard is a mover. He's a mauler. He wants to generate a ton of movement. He was at guard. Robert Hunt was at tackle. Hunt's going to ultimately move inside to guard as well. And look, Billy Napier, what he's done there, you don't think of 2 offensive linemen coming from Louisiana in one draft, but it's going to happen. Billy Napier really has something going there. Had that trio of running backs, Raymond Calais, he's a senior this year. He won't be back, but you have Trey Regis and Elijah Mitchell, 2 guys who have draft potential. I think there are 2 guys to keep an eye on there in the Sun Belt Conference. And so when I really look at this, I think this is going to be a guy who can add some additional power, some nastiness, a la Richie Incognito, if you will. I think that'd be a nice pick in round number 5 for the Raiders. So we're halfway through the AFC West, which means we get to move just a couple of picks to Denver, 15 overall. And I mentioned Henry Ruggs III potentially going to Denver. And that was really the guy that I had penciled in for Denver this entire pre-draft process. And What's funny is that's probably what's going to happen is Henry Ruggs will probably end up going to Denver because that's usually what happens, especially when I make the change at the very last minute. And the reason why I'm looking at Henry Ruggs, Cortland Sutton, established himself as the team's top wideout, but your number two wideout, Deshaun Hamilton, finished fifth on the team in receptions behind Noah Fant, the tight end, and a couple of running backs, Royce Freeman and Phillip Lindsay. Drew Lock, you got to get him some additional weapons, and he really flourished at Mizzou in Columbia when he had a healthy Emmanuel Hall on the outside, tossing dimes to the streaking receiver down the sideline. That's really when Drew Lock was dangerous. He had that vertical threat, and that was really kind of a comfort, that security blanket, if you will, a guy that he could just drop the ball into at will. And I think the Broncos are lacking a true vertical threat in Henry Ruggs III. His 4.27 40 time makes him a perfect fit if he's still on the board. But here's the thing. Even if Henry Ruggs is not on the board in this case, he's not. Have him going off the board 13 overall to the Niners, as I mentioned earlier. But Jalen Reagor, here's a guy that I think Denver needs to target in round 2. He can be that vertical threat. Unlike a guy like a KJ Hamler, I think Jalen Reagor attacks the football in the air. He's more of a natural pass catcher, very athletic guy, has a 42-inch vertical leap. And the thing with Jalen Reagor, actually, it's not 42 inches. That's Henry Ruggs. I want to make sure that I'm completely accurate here with Jalen Reagor. No, actually, he does. 42-inch vertical leap. So go figure. The two most explosive athletes here, each with a 42-inch vertical leap. So I was right. But he posted a 40 time in the 4.2s on social media. It was unofficial, but still, you're talking about that explosiveness vertically. I think you can target him in round number 2. And Detroit, I think this is possible because Denver is sitting there at number 46 overall. I think there are some other picks ahead of them. Could Jalen Reagor go there? Could Denver potentially trade up to get him? Sure, but I think they can still sit there at 46 overall and land Jalen Reagor. You get that vertical threat for Drew Lock. And so sitting there in round number 1 at number 15 with Ruggs off the board, you have to look to really replace Chris Harris Jr. And I think they did that by bringing in AJ Boye from Jacksonville. There's still a need for a corner on the outside, especially considering Bryce Callahan is best suited as the nickel and Isaac Yiadom is not ready for a starting role. And really it's CJ Henderson and everybody else after Jeffrey Okudah. Solidified himself in 2018. Pro Football Focus confirmed that he had just one reception on every 19 snaps and didn't allow a single touchdown in coverage. As a junior, first team all SEC honors after leading the Gators with 11 pass breakups despite only playing in 9 games, battling an ankle injury during the season. 4.39 40 at the combine as well, so showed off that athleticism. Cover skills to be on the island. Lockdown corner, absolutely. Good size for the position. Smooth athlete, fluid hips to seamlessly change directions. Has the agility and fluidity to really mirror that receiver, sticking like glue, stride for stride, not allowing separation. You'll see him get his hands on the receiver early, does a good job rerouting his man off the ball, plays with anticipation, reads the quarterback's eyes, driving quickly on the football, and in off coverage, very smooth in transition, closing burst to disrupt the receiver at the catch point. Does a really good job playing on the ball side hip of the wideout on in-breaking routes, allows him to make a break on the ball, knock the football away. So simply put, he puts himself in tremendous position to make a play on the football. Now, where he struggles has at times with his ability to track the football with his back to the ball, and zone recognition can be better. Will lose sight of the receiver, and maybe the biggest knock is the tackling. Shown an ability to come up and run support, but he plays with inconsistent effort, wrap up and drive up the ball carrier on one play, then offer a poor effort by diving at the feet of a runner in space on the next. So I think teams will test his physicality, which I think can be called into question at times. But while that tackling ability is a concern, I think those elite cover skills outweigh any of those limitations. He is the number 2 corner. Get your corner there in round number 1. Get your speedster in round number 2, and I think Denver's off and running after that. And Denver's got quite a few picks in this draft. So they've actually got 3 in round number 3. And so I'm looking at an inside linebacker with their first pick in round number 3. And if you're scoring at home, that pick is going to be number 77 overall. And that's going to be Malik Harrison, 6'3", 234 pounds, out of Ohio State. And when you look at that line, I think they just need to get more athleticism on that line. I like Josie Jewell, what he did at Iowa. You've got Todd Davis, who's really been an overachiever there on the interior of that linebacking core. Alexander Johnson's another guy that they're talking about there. But I think Malik Harrison has proven, he can play inside, he can play outside. I think in a 3-4 scheme, Malik Harrison can play that inside linebacker position. Very intelligent player, knows where the football is going to be. 29 tackles for loss, including 16 and a half in 2019, over 200 tackles. And really when he was a starter the last 2 seasons, 156 of those tackles in those last 2 years. A guy who can drop into coverage, 9 pass breakups in his career as well. So it's not just a one-trick pony, a guy that plays behind the line of scrimmage. He can drop into coverage, has some pretty good athleticism, a guy who, isn't going to necessarily line up with the tight end, but a guy who I think can play in zone coverage pretty well, reads the quarterback's eyes, diagnoses plays. I think that'd be a nice fit there for Denver. And then I think you have to look offensive line after that. I've got a couple of picks there for them in round number 3. The first one, I think you really have to address that center position. Graham Glasgow, I think, is going to come in. He didn't give up a sack a season ago with the Lions, has that versatility to be a guard and a center. I think he's ultimately going to play guard. And I think, I think that center position is going to be up for grabs. I'm looking at Tyler Biadasz. I think you can add some of that zone blocking scheme. Tyler Biadasz there at center. A guy who started every game in his career at Wisconsin. He's limited athletically, and I think that's why he has fallen in the draft. 6'4", 314 pounds. A guy who I think is athletic enough to get out and be a lead blocker. Very intelligent player. This was a guy Wisconsin had to replace, 3 NFL offensive linemen. Michael Dieter and Bo Benshaw and David Edwards. Cole Van Lannon was just a part-time starter there at the left tackle position. I think what he was able to do and, block for Jonathan Taylor, who rushed for over 2,000 yards yet again. I think that really speaks to the IQ there for Biadasz at the pivot. I think he's a guy who can step in and start right away. Again, not the most athletically gifted center by any means, but really a smart performer. And I think those are some of the guys that are going to get on the field earlier, are those intelligent players, a guy who I think intellectually is going to be ready day one. I think you can plug him in and allow him to start. And I think he'll probably end up being a starter in the league for a long time at that center position. So then finally, you're looking at another tackle. Another offensive lineman, and that's going to be a tackle. Garrett Bowles. This is a guy, the holding penalties, the sacks given up. He's a former first-round pick, and he's under contract for another year. So really the question is going to be, does this guy have 9 lives? How long is he going to stay with Denver? He's under contract through 2021. So I think you still have a little bit of time, but you still have to prepare for potentially life without Garrett Bowles. And I think if that's going to be the case, I think you're looking at a guy who can be, has raw potential, very athletic. He's a big dude. He's 6'8". But you watch him play, he's very raw, needs to get in an NFL weight room. He's got chicken legs. He needs to stop skipping leg day. He's 6'8", 308, ran a 5'09", 40 at the combine. Alex Taylor out of South Carolina State. I really like this guy. He's very athletic. If you saw him at the Senior Bowl, but I wanted to see him play against, that higher level of competition, and he more than held his own. I think it's one of those things he really struggled to anchor, and that's really, speaks to that lower body strength that he was lacking. Get him into, an NFL weight room, get him in there with a position coach, work on technique a little bit, and I think, tap into some of that potential, and you could potentially be looking at the Broncos moving on from Garrett Bowles when his contract is up at the end of the 2021 season. I firmly believe that Alex Taylor has that type of potential. I'm looking at round 4 for Denver, and look, you got Jarrell Casey at, they brought him in from Tennessee, and you've got Shelby Harris on the opposite side. That nose tackle, I think, is a position that needs to be addressed. You've got Mike Purcell there. I'm not feeling it there. I think they can do better. And I'm looking at Leki Fotu out of Utah. This is a big physical dude, a guy who, he's mean, he's nasty. If you watch that USC game, first play of the game, he takes Keaton Slovis, drives him into the ground, ultimately concussion, out for the game. Fotu, is a space eater. He's a guy who's going to absorb a lot of blockers, allowed guys like Bradley and I and Francis Bernard to make plays behind him. Cody Barton, the year before that, was another guy that was playing all over the field. 17 tackles for loss, 4 sacks in his career. Again, I worry about his durability. Has yet to finish an entire season. And so you think about that. Utah, I think at most they're playing 14 games. You got to get through the rigors of a 16, well, I guess now 17 game schedule. Is he going to be able to hold up there? But when you're sharing that position with a guy like Mike Purcell, I think that's one of the things, at least as he gets his legs there within the NFL. I think he is somebody who can hold down that nose tackle position, very strong at the point of attack, has some of that short area burst to get into the backfield and affect the passer a little bit. And so I really like this pick for Denver, sitting there at the top of day number 3 for them. And they're going to have a very active day 3 as well. Pick number 18, Leki Fotu. You move on to round number 5, and look, Denver's got another pick here. Let's see. They've got the compensatory pick sitting there at 179 overall. And I'm looking at a safety with this pick. And the reason for that, you've got Kareem Jackson, the elder statesman there at strong safety. You've got Justin Simmons, the franchise player at free safety. And I don't think there's a lot behind them. So at least, if nothing else, you get a guy who can come in, add depth to the position. And if, Kareem Jackson, if he ends up retiring, or Justin Simmons ends up moving on after the season, after the franchise tag, I think Brandon Jones showed at Texas that he has that leadership ability, really leading. He was the leader of that Longhorn secondary these last couple of seasons. Over 200 tackles in his career, 14 tackles for loss, 3 interceptions, 7 pass breakups, a guy who wants to be physical. I don't think he is as much of a playmaker in coverage, but a guy who really wants to come in and, I think he plays with reckless abandon at times, just kind of throws his body at guys, doesn't always wrap up, but he always seems to be in position to make a play. And that's one of the things I think he has, the instincts, that football IQ. He just needs to put everything together. And I think, this is somebody who, if you put him in there and play with a guy like Kareem Jackson, Justin Simmons, learn from them, I think you can tap into some of that potential there, making him potentially a really nice pick. Some people have him coming off the board much earlier, possibly the 3rd round. I think 5th round is actually better value for him at that point. Now I've got another tackle coming off the board. I think you still have to find some depth at that position as well. I'm looking at Terrence Steele out of Texas Tech, 6'6", 312 pounds, ran a 5.03 at the combine, very athletic tackle. If you watched him at the Senior Bowl, another guy who I thought athletically, he was the right tackle there. And I really, for a long time, was watching Travis Bruffy, the left tackle. But the guy that always ended up making more plays, was the right tackle. This was a guy who was just, effortless with his kick slide, while Bruffy was getting beat on the left side. Steele was handling his man, able to really wall him off with some of that speed. Use that kick slide, getting a deep enough, step there, that initial step. What drives me nuts are those linemen who end up taking those horizontal steps. And when you've got an edge rusher, if you just start doing some of the geometry, some of the math with it, and some of the angles, if you're stepping horizontally at a guy who's taking this angle off the edge, he's going to beat you. he's going to beat you to the edge and he's coming right around you. So you've got a guy like Terrence Steele, that athleticism, another guy who I think is still raw and needs some seasoning before he can really make an impact. But I think in round number 6, those are some of the guys that you could potentially be looking for there. Round number 7, they have 2 picks. I'm looking at Austin Edwards out of Ferris State, the defensive end, 6'5", 275 pounds. And this is a guy, look, he reminds me a lot of Zach Seiler, who also came out of Ferris State, was a 7th round pick of the Ravens. He's now on the Miami Dolphins roster. And, I think with Seiler was a lot bigger. He was over 300 pounds. I think he was actually 290 in college. They've bulked him up to over 300 pounds. And I think when you look at Austin Edwards, I think he has some of that frame to be able to add some weight to him and still make a difference out there on the field. But if you put on a Ferris State, any game film, and it was really hard for me to find, but I was ultimately able to find number 8 running around there on that team. And in 2019, 64 tackles at the defensive end position, very active for a defensive end, 10.5 sacks and 17.5 tackles for loss. Again, very active, makes a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage. And I think this is a nice developmental pick there for Denver in round number 7. I mentioned that you have Jarrell Casey and you have Shelby Harris, but you've got DeMarcus Walker and Draymond Jones behind him. I think this could potentially be a pick that we won't really see a ton of production from him initially, but a guy that you could potentially even put on the practice squad for a year or two, really put some size to him, and then see what you have after that. And then I think that last pick that they have in round number 7, it's pick number 255 overall, second to last pick. I'm looking at Casey Toohill out of Stanford, 6'4", 250 pounds, outside linebacker, a guy who just knows how to get after the quarterback. And you've got Bradley Chubb and Von Miller, 2 of the best edge rushers, best combo, I think, in the league coming off the edge. And then behind him, you've got Malik Reed. There is Jeremiah Tauchu on the roster. Justin Hollins was drafted in the 5th round a season ago. But Toohill, I think this is another athletic edge rusher coming off the corner, a guy who, look, he went to Stanford, smart guy, intelligent, 21.5 tackles for loss, 14 sacks, a guy who, look, he may have to work to make the roster, may have to spend a year on the practice squad, but I think, he has some skills that and some tools for the Broncos to work with. So I think round number 7, that makes some sense there. And then finally, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Super Bowl champs. We're going to round out our tour here of the NFL teams after free agency with Kansas City. And look, Super Bowl champs, one of the most explosive offenses we've seen in years with Patrick Mahomes leading the way, but it may have actually been the addition of Steve Spagnuolo as their defensive coordinator that really elevated them to the championship level. Cornerback position has been an area of concern in past years. Sometimes it's been downright dismal, but Spagnuolo's influence really allowed the likes of Kyle Fuller, Bashaud Breeland, Shavarius Ward, Morris Claiborne, and Rashad Fenton to thrive. Fuller and Breeland came up huge in the Super Bowl, each picking off Jimmy Garoppolo. Fuller left in free agency. Breeland was re-signed to a 1-year deal. I think the top corners coming off the board, I think KC is going to wait until day 2 to take a corner. I think that ultimately makes sense for them. I'm looking at Cam Dantzler in round number 2, the 6'2", 187-pound corner out of Mississippi State. So if they're passing on a corner, then where do they go? There's the 1-2 punch up front, rushing the passer, Chris Jones on the inside, Frank Clark on the outside. Frank Clark needs a running mate. And I'm looking at Yetur Gross-Matos. If he's still on the board, the kid out of Penn State, the physically imposing defensive end, his explosiveness and power would make him the perfect fit opposite Clark. But I think this pick may very well actually be used on the interior of that offensive line. The left guard, Andrew Wiley, the center, Austin Ryder, the right guard, LDT, Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, all battled injuries a season ago. Wiley and Ryder only under contract through this season. And then Stefan Wisniewski, obviously he's gone as well. So that that hurts the interior of the line as well. I think they're going to be looking for an upgrade and a player that has the versatility of Cesar Ruiz at Michigan, 6'3", 307 pounds, play both center and guard. I think he makes sense. He's more of that obvious choice. 10 games as a starter, played 10 games as a freshman, started 5 at right guard, then slid over to the pivot, started the next 26 games for the Wolverines. Technically sound athlete, always working to the whistle, bends well, fires off the ball with a low pad level, maintains leverage, very effective on seal blocks, getting his hips around quickly to open a hole for the back. If you watch him play, his head is always on a swivel, always looking to deliver a block, always looking to make a play down the field. Agility allows him to be the perfect candidate as a lead blocker. And when he gets to the second level in a hurry, he can also be under control at the same time, making contact, locking onto that moving target. Whenever he gets his hands on a defender, he's looking to finish the block with the most devastating way possible. And pass protection, fires out of a stance in a hurry. After the snap and pass protection, shoots those hands under the interior lineman's pad level. Good initial punch at the point of attack, maintains active feet, has very, that lateral agility allows him to mirror that defender effortlessly. If he can get the hands on the defender early, he can sustain those blocks to the whistle. What he runs into, though, is he doesn't always win with his hands at the point, can be susceptible to quick pass rush moves off the ball, will overextend at times, gets too far over his feet, loses leverage, causes him to get driven back, but he's the best interior lineman in this draft. Only guy who has a first-round grade. I think KC, look, they need to replace Wisniewski, and they also have questions at the center position, so wherever they want to play him, I think Cesar Ruiz will be a day one starter for the Chiefs. Now, I mentioned Cam Dantzler in the second round. I initially had him coming off the board in round 3, and I mentioned him, I believe, to the Rams in my last podcast. But I look at Cam Dantzler, and I think the issues for him are really the speed. And with Dantzler, he's a 6'2 corner, has excellent length, 187 pounds, so he's very slight. Ran a 4.64 40. I think that 4.64 was second slowest among all the corners at the combine. 34.5-inch vertical leap, so he's got some explosiveness to the lower body, but that's still on the lower end among the corners as well. So those are some of the things that you really worry about, but at the same time, he definitely has ball skills. This is a guy who was really a lockdown corner for Mississippi State over the last couple of seasons, and he had 5 interceptions, 20 pass breakups in his career, and I think the biggest thing that I can say for Cam Dantzler is his position coach is Terrell Buckley. T-Buck knows a thing or two about the cornerback position, and when T-Buck says this is the guy who's the top corner in the SEC and potentially in the entire draft, then I think you need to listen. I think there are some skills there. There are some things to work with. You just worry about the athleticism. Is he going to be a guy who can handle NFL wideouts? That's really going to be a huge question mark. Played in just 9 games as a freshman and as a junior, so you worry about some durability issues there as well. But I think, at the end of the second round, Kansas City looking for another corner, I think that makes some sense. Now in round 3, I think Kansas City transitions to the offensive side of the football again. And, Eric Bieniemy, look, Damian Williams has been nice at the running back position. Darwin Thompson filled in very well. But I think this is a team that needs to find another running back that can really make an impact. And I'm looking at Zach Moore. Can't even get this right. I said Zach Thomas. I said Zach Morris. It's Zach Moss. And Zach Moss out of Utah, this was a guy very physical. He's a big dude too. He's not very tall, but powerfully built. 5'9", 223 pounds. Ran a 4.65 40 at the combine. Not overly fast, but this is a guy who I think is quicker than he is fast and has some lower body strength that really allows him to run through tackles. I think this would be a nice complement to Damian Williams and Darwin Thompson. Adds a different dynamic to that to that running back room. A guy who's rushed for over 1,000 yards in each of the last 3 seasons, has some injury concerns, and I think that's why he's kind of fallen to round number 3 in my opinion. But played an entire season there for Utah, over 1,400 yards on the ground, 15 touchdowns, 38 in his career, over 4,000 yards for the Utes, and look, 66 receptions in his career as well. Had two of the last 3 seasons had at least 28 receptions. A guy who I think is just continuing to get better as a pass catcher, and if he can stay healthy, he could potentially be one of those sleepers at the running back position. I think KC would be happy to get him in round number 3, which means we then transition to day 3 of the draft. And I mentioned that they needed to get a defensive end. And in round number 4, I'm looking at Khalid Kareem out of Notre Dame. Now, Khalid Kareem, he was not the explosive pass rusher that his counterpart, Julian Okwara, was. And I think that's why he's ultimately coming off the board later on in the draft. But Khalid Kareem, look, really good production. In his 3 seasons there at Notre Dame, he's a senior. 26 tackles for loss, 13 sacks, 8 pass breakups as well. Does a good job with his length, getting his hands in the passing lane. 4 forced fumbles, including 3 of this past season. So he's a guy who knows how to find the football, has a nose for the ball, knows what to do when he arrives at the football as well. He's 6'4", 268 pounds. I mentioned the length, over 34-inch arms, so definitely able to get his hands into the passing lane and disrupt the passer. And when you look at the Chiefs, outside of Frank Clark, there's obviously Tano Passanio, another big physical dude. You've got Breeland Speaks, which really was a surprise draft pick in the second round a couple years ago. You've got Alex Okafor on the roster as well. I think this is another guy, he kind of fits the mold of the type of pass rusher that the Chiefs have on their roster, and a guy who I think could ultimately work his way into being a rotational player, if not a starter, opposite Frank Clark. So then I mentioned, I don't know that I did, but the Chiefs only have one other draft pick unless they trade back into the draft, and that's going to be in round number 5. And I think they need to find a linebacker, to be perfectly honest with you. And with KC, that linebacker position, they've got Damian Wilson, they've got Anthony Hitchens, Dorian O'Daniel, Ben Neiman, a lot of overachievers at the position. And, I'm looking at a guy who's going to bring some athleticism. And that's Michael Walker out of Fresno State. This is a guy, he's a big, he's really lean. He's really tall, but he's lean. He's 6'3", 230 pounds. He looks leaner than that, to be perfectly honest with you. Ran a 4.65 at the combine. A guy who flies around to the football, makes a lot of plays. You're there for Fresno State. He was really the guy that the Bulldogs counted on to make plays on the defensive side of the ball, and I thought that he really stepped up and did that. Let's see. In his 2 seasons there at Fresno, ultimately had 2 seasons, 182 tackles, including 96 this past season, 22.5 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, 10 pass breakups as well, 3 forced fumbles. So he's got a nose for the football, can drop into coverage, pretty fluid athlete, a guy who can also make plays behind the line of scrimmage, get after the quarterback a little bit. And those 182 tackles shows that he's also incredibly active as a linebacker. So, I think that'd be a nice guy that you could add into that rotation and potentially be a guy who could surprise people in the 5th round. So that's the AFC West. And ultimately, we've gotten through all 8 of the divisions. We've taken a look at all 32 teams and really what I anticipate teams potentially doing with some of their draft picks, and kind of debating what each of these teams are going to do on draft day. Trying to really think of, all right, well, if this happens, then what's going to be the backup plan for a particular franchise? It's been a lot of fun with that. And we're going to then transition to the positions. We're going to take a look at each position and talk about some of the draft grades that I have, or I'm sorry, the positional grades. Where do I see them going in the draft? What rounds do I see these players going? We're going to start with the quarterbacks and potentially also take a look at the running backs as well. Want to make sure that we don't run out of time. But when you look at those quarterbacks, I think you have 4 quarterbacks who are going to come off the board in round number 1. I think that definitely is going to end up happening. You've got Joe Burrow, but Joe Burrow's not going to be the only guy. Obviously, you've got Tua, and if Tua had stayed healthy, he could potentially be the guy that you're talking about as the number 1 overall pick. And then you've got Justin Herbert and Jordan Love after that. Which one of those guys is going to be first off the board? I think it's going to be Herbert, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is Jordan Love. And then after that, you've got some other quarterbacks to really keep an eye out for. Jacob Eason, Jake Fromm, Jalen Hurts, Anthony Gordon. So you've got some quarterbacks there. Those are all guys that I have coming off the board in the first 4 rounds. There's some other names at the end of day 3 that I think are names that people need to really be mindful of as well. And then at that running back position, very deep at the position, there's 17 running backs that I think will get drafted. And you've got some versatility there. You've got a lot of guys who can catch the football out of the backfield, guys who have shared roles, guys who can be very physical between the tackles. So I think there are going to be a lot of running backs actually at, like I said, 17. And if you look at it, I only have 1 running back coming off the board in round number 1, but I think there are going to be 7 that come off the board in the first 2 days. And then I'm looking at 4 in round number 4, 1 in round 5, another 3 in round 6, and 2 in round 7. So not as many at the running back position as we've had in previous seasons, but I think the players that we're going to be talking about, there are some names there that can, I think, really make an impact early on in their career. So we're going to kind of take a look at the draft history by position and really what that history looks like for both the quarterback and running back position. And then we'll get into the specific players themselves as well. And then that'll hopefully get things ramped up, get you ready for that draft on April 23rd, right before the draft. That Wednesday before the 22nd, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have released my final mock draft. It'll be on the website, but we'll go ahead and break it down here on the podcast, get through everything as well. So I hope you've enjoyed all the content to this point. I've really enjoyed bringing it to you. And, we're going to go ahead and keep this thing going. I want to be fast and furious with these podcasts, get another one released, hopefully in the next day or two, continue the stretch that we've been going on and really take things from there, carry that momentum all the way into the draft. So for readyforthedraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. Can't believe it's already episode 32 of that 2020 podcast series. Hope I am getting you ready for the NFL draft. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Hope everyone has a great week. Be safe, everyone, and we'll talk soon. Take care, and I am out of here.